I started to understand. Julie wasn't trying to simplify my life, she was trimming it. She had arranged things. The question in my mind folded tight like a spring: why? My mind supplied faces and reasons. Mrs. Patterson leaned over the white picket fence and said it like she meant well. Your daughter said you forget things now. I'm so sorry. The words landed like a stone. My hands were still full of pruning shears and a bag of rose clippings. I set them down slowly. The afternoon sun was low and bright, and the shadow of her words cut across my chest. I had been careful up until then. I kept lists. I wrote things down. I paid bills on time. I kept my watch set the right way. But Julie, my daughter, had started whispering to neighbors. She made the story small and soft like a joke. She said I put milk in the cabinet and bread in the fridge. She told people I locked myself out and walked to the wrong house. People believed her because she smiled when she said it and because she sounded worried. I walked home with the rose smell on my jacket and her words winding in my head. In the kitchen I found a note stuck to the fridge in Julie's neat handwriting: "We're handling mail now. Too confusing for you." My stomach dropped. My mail was the one place I kept my life tidy. I opened the note and turned it over like it was a stranger's letter. There was a pen mark shaped like care. "We're doing what's best," it read. Inside, the house smelled like lemon cleaner and Easter. Julie and Greg were both home. Greg lifted his head from the couch and grinned like the world was theirs for the taking. Julie's smile was softer. She stepped forward and put a hand on my sleeve. "We just want to help, Dad," she said. Help. The word prickled. I had given them everything I had to give. Bread, rides, advice, a roof. I had taught Julie to tie shoelaces and to read maps. Now her hand on my sleeve felt light and foreign. Their faces looked kind, but my eyes saw the lines around Greg's mouth where plans lived. He looked like a man who thought he was owed something. That night I lay awake in the narrow bed and thought of how whispers became a tide. Mrs. Patterson's words were the first small wave. Later, I would learn how fast the water rose. For now I wrote the date in a spiral notebook on the nightstand and closed the book like a door. Before I slept, I left a small note of my own in the kitchen, under the cereal box. "Do not handle my mail," it said. It felt small and brave. Oh, and if you like this kind of story, please subscribe and tell me the time where you are now. It hurt to ask, but I had learned early that witnesses mattered. The days after Mrs. Patterson's fence voice I noticed the world shrinking. Neighbors stopped waving when I walked. Packages disappeared from my porch. The mail that once included birthday cards and glossy flyers now shifted like secret freight. Julie said it was because she was making things simpler for me. She said I would not have to worry. Her voice was gentle, like she was smoothing a blanket over something alive. At the grocery store, Mr. Collins, who used to tell me jokes about his tomatoes, walked by without a nod. The mail carrier slowed and pretended to look at his list. I stood on my own porch and watched the street as if I could see what had changed inside the heads of people I had known for years. The house felt crowded and empty at once. Julie and Greg moved through my rooms like they owned the light. One morning I found the mail gone from the box and a stack of envelopes on the kitchen table. Bills, notices, a letter from the VA. All folded, corners neat. My name was on most of them. Julie said she had organized them and would file for me. Her fingers smelled faintly of perfume, and Greg hovered close like a guard. "We'll handle the hard stuff, Dad," he said. "You focus on walking and getting rest." I wanted to be easy about it. I am not a man who liked to make trouble. I had been a mechanic and then a bank teller and had always found that quiet work of small things made the world whole. But the stack on the table made a low sound like an accusation. I picked up a bill and the number on it. I recognized the font of the bank's name because I'd worked with banks my whole life. Julie watched me the way someone watches a game they have fixed. Later, when I checked my account online, numbers did not line up. Small charges, then bigger ones, to places that smelled like trouble. At first I thought I misclicked. Then I thought of Greg's hands on my mail and his neat handwriting in the forms I had seen once while cleaning up. He had always been good with forms, quick with a signature. That skill had once served him at work, probably. Now it felt like a used blade. At night I sat at the kitchen table with the lamp on, the bills spread like waves. The house hummed with the flat sound of Julie's TV in the living room. I tried to tell myself I was being silly. "They are trying to help," I muttered into my cup. But even as I spoke the words, I knew they sounded like someone trying to convince themselves a broken thing still worked. The next morning I taped the first note to the front door: "Do not open or sign anything for me." I used a heavy pen. The letters were thick and sure. I put the date and my name. Then I took a breath and walked down the street to Mrs. Patterson's porch. That night, months later, I would remember the smell of the kitchen as proof. It was the smell of old coffee and lemon cleaner and something else, metal, maybe like coins. I had come home from the hardware store with a new screwdriver set and a small bag of nails. I set them on the counter, pushed open the fridge for milk, and found bills tucked behind the carton. Collection notices I had never seen. A notice for a charge that had nothing to do with me. Julie was in the doorway with a plate of cookies, like everything was normal. "We don't want you to worry," she said. "We're taking care of it." Her voice was practiced. I wanted to ask whom she meant by "we." But the words stuck in my throat. That night I sat at the kitchen table with the pile of mail and a lamp buzzing like a tiny insect. I read each letter carefully and found several that had been opened and then resealed. Some had new notes inside with tiny writing. Those notes said things like, "Pay now. We'll take care of balance." My name was on top of the envelope, but the handwriting inside was different, angular, not mine. I compared it to the handwriting on a grocery list from last week. They were not the same. My hands started to shake. I was 66 then, but my body is used to work and calm. The shaking was the small animal of fear. I put the letters back in the neat stack and walked to the garage. In the toolbox beneath the old torque wrench I kept a spiral notebook. I opened it and wrote the date in thick black numbers. Then I wrote what I had found. I wrote the amount every time. I wrote the name of the company. I wrote until the lines filled. None of them kind. Money, easy control, a future that fit them. I felt small, like a coat that no longer fit. I had always been proud of the work I did in the home I had paid for. Now lines in my bank book looked like strangers. I could not shake the image of Greg at the computer the week before, eyes sharp, hands quick. That afternoon I drove to the public library. The building smelled of paper and dust, and the computers hummed a friendly way. I used the terminal near the window and tried not to make a sound when I logged into my bank. The screen showed things that made my chest tight. Transfers I had not authorized. Payments to a place called Razor Games, a name sticking out like a joke. $1,200 here, $800 there. Once you notice a hole, your eye finds more. I printed the statements. The paper felt heavy in my hands, a small armor. When I left the library, I felt foolish and brave at once. I had done a small thing the day that would later matter. I had found the first footprints. I pinned them to the wall of my mind like flags. The war had begun. Coffee is a poor thing to trust when you are being watched. Greg accidentally spilled his black cup across my laptop the day after I printed the bank statements at the library. He stood there looking shocked and immediately knelt to dab with a dishcloth. His apology was quick and smooth. "I'm so sorry, Dad. I clumsy. Let me help." His hands worked fast in a way that did not match his words. I let him work. I wanted to be kind. But after he left I opened the laptop and found the screen slashed with coffee trails and a layer of sticky brown. The keyboard stuck like an old piano. Something cold crawled into my bones. The laptop contained the passwords I used for everything, the site where I checked my accounts, a file where I kept scanned copies of my life papers. Now it smelled like coffee and was damp. Julie said it was an accident. The neighbors said accidents happen. Greg even left a post-it with his name and a heart on the corner of the kitchen counter where he had left the dishcloth. I felt foolish to suspect malice, but I could not help it. After the laptop incident, 2 strange emails appeared in my account, password recovery notices for odd sites. I changed my passwords with hands that were careful and slow. That night I emptied my pockets and moved my laptop to the top shelf of the closet. I bought a small safe and bolted it down under the workbench in the garage. It felt drastic, but I had thought of worse things. People who steal money climb on your trust. I wanted to be a house with a locked door. I started carrying a small notebook in my shirt pocket. I wrote down every odd thing that happened. The note about coffee spilled on my laptop had a time, a date, and a tiny drawing of a cup. I also made a backup of the files I thought mattered. I saved them onto a USB stick and put it in my shoe in the closet. The act felt ridiculous, like hiding treasure in a cookie tin, but safe from curious hands. I took apart the damaged keyboard and found a small grain of coffee crusted deep inside. A piece of the sticky paste matched the drink Greg drank. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was everything. I sat in the garage with the tools and the small safe and counted the breaths through my nose. The coffee smell had turned into something like a map. It pointed to a direction I did not want to follow, but follow it I would. Voices behind doors have a way of sounding small and conspiratorial. I learned to watch vents and cracks because that is where the real talk happens. One night, while the house slept, the furnace hummed and I could hear them through the bathroom vent. They thought I did not know how to listen. They were wrong. Greg's voice was low and sharp. If we get guardianship, the house and pension are ours. Easy money, he said. Julie answered with a small sound, like someone swallowing. The words hung heavy in the hall like a coat. My hands tightened on the soap bar in the sink until the edges pressed into my palms. I stepped back slowly and pretended I had knocked a glass. The small noise covered my escape. I did not want to be seen, but I needed to know how deep this went. I had always been practical about trouble, assess, plan, act. That training from a life of small crises lived in me. I opened my bedroom door and walked down the hall as if I might stretch my legs. They stopped talking when my foot hit the carpet. Julie and Greg moved like two fish trapped in a jar. Julie's eyes were bright with heat, and Greg's hands were steady, the way a man who had rehearsed a speech might be steady. Both looked caught. For a second each wore a face of surprise, then returned to their masks of concern. I pretended not to hear anything until they mentioned the word guardianship again. It struck me like a door slamming. Guardianship is a legal way to take away a person's rights. Courts could put someone in the care of another and strip rights to money, property, and decisions. For someone who had been a man of his own life, the idea of legal erasure felt colder than a winter wind. I returned to my room and sat on the bed in the dark. The building had been in my family for decades. I had fixed the sink, painted the porch, mowed the lawn. Everything I owned was a map of my life. If they filed for guardianship, the map could be rewritten and my name could be small on the paper. That night I started a new page in the spiral notebook. The page heading in heavy letters read, Guardianship. Under it I wrote the date and the names I had heard. Then I wrote one more thing in the margin, like a promise. If they try, I will be ready. It was a small sentence, but it felt like an anchor. I did not yet know how I would fight, only that I must. When the word guardianship crawled its way into my sleep, my throat closed. I had thought that kind of thing happened in stories or terrible movies. Not in my life, not in my own home. But words have a way of becoming blueprints. Julie and Greg had drawn one with quiet strokes. I started to put pieces together. Little signs that had looked harmless now had shapes. The extra key on the hook that Greg had asked about, for convenience. The way Julie had casually asked whether I had a will. The time a stranger came to the door to check on my memory, and I had found his badge suspicious. Each small strange thing built a house of evidence in my head. I got a public library card that week and used the computers to look up the phrase, Guardianship Arizona. The legal words were dry and bitter. A court can remove a person's right to handle money and property if the judge finds they cannot. The judge can appoint someone else to make big decisions. In plain speech it meant someone else could live in my house, spend my money, and pick my doctor. The very image of it felt like a hole opening under my feet. I printed out a short paper about how to fight guardianship. It had steps, document behavior, gather witnesses, get legal help, keep copies of everything. The printer whirred and spat the pages onto my lap like a promise. I used the library terminal because I was careful not to leave a tech trail at home. But the printing felt like a test I had passed. That night I called an old friend from work, Tom, who used to know a lawyer. Tom's voice was gravelly and kind. You need someone who understands elder law, he said. This is not family drama, Will. This is legal. We set a time to talk more on Saturday. As I sat on the porch with the paper in my hand, the house seemed both smaller and larger. Smaller because the people inside it were strangers who used my rooms the way tenants use furnished apartments. Larger because I could feel the far edge of a fight I had to fight. My heart beat steady and slow. I had made a life out of steady hands and careful thinking. I would need both now. I started to write down everything. At first it felt like a small thing, a man making lists. Then it became a rule. Date, time, what was said, who was present. I wrote in plain words and did not let myself add feelings. The notebook on the workbench was a ledger of truth. The first entry was the fence talk with Mrs. Patterson. The second was Julie's note about the mail. Then came the coffee spill, and the call I had heard through the vent. I wrote the words they had used when they thought I could not hear. My handwriting stayed neat, as if the letters themselves needed proof. I also began to photograph things with my old phone. I took pictures of my mail when it looked wrong and of the bills with suspicious charges. I took a photo of the coffee stain on the laptop and of Greg's sticky napkin left on the counter. The photos went straight into a folder titled Evidence on the phone. I put the phone under the floorboard in the closet after each use, a secret nest. When Julie moved items in my bedroom and pretended I had been clumsy, I photographed the room before she could. I learned to be fast. I learned to be quiet like the places where secrets live. I also saved copies of bank statements and printed them at the library. Each paper felt like a tile being added to a floor I planned to stand on. Keeping a record changed the way I felt. Instead of being a man passively watched, I became a man who watched back. It did not cure the fear, but it turned it into a purpose. I could not stop what had started, but I could make a map of it. If there was to be a court, if there was to be a fight, I would have a story that matched theirs. The pages in my notebook were the first draft. The cameras were the hardest thing to buy. I felt silly walking into the electronics store, a man with gray hair and a slow gait, asking for small motion cameras. The clerk smiled like a man who sells to many kinds of customers. I picked 2 that looked like small smoke detectors and 2 that could hide inside an air freshener case. I told myself they were only to make me feel safe. Installing them was a small clandestine mission. I put one in the kitchen light fixture and one inside a potted plant by the front door. 2 more I tucked onto high shelves in the living room and the hallway. The lenses were tiny, like spider eyes. The little red lights were off. I had chosen models that recorded to a small card and that did not pulse. I did not want to give my project away. At first the footage showed nothing interesting, an empty kitchen, a morning sun on the table. Then one night at 2 a.m., the motion sensor blinked awake. I watched the playback on my phone in the garage and my hands went cold. Greg moved through the kitchen like a man on a mission. He touched the drawer where I kept my wallet. His face was hard and half in shadow. He pulled out papers, rifled through them, then replaced them in a messy stack. I had watched a man invade my privacy before, but seeing it felt different. The camera made the moment real and sharp like a photograph. I downloaded the clip and backed it up on the old USB in my shoe. I labeled the file with the date and the words, Greg Rifles Drawer. After that I began to check the cameras every night. I learned their language. I learned the way light fell at different hours. I learned how quickly men like Greg moved when they thought the house slept. The footage showed small things, keys moved, notes taken, a signature practice on a napkin. Each small clip added to a growing picture I did not yet show anyone. I began to sleep less and plan more. The cameras were my eyes when I could not be awake. They were small and mechanical, but they held truth. And truth, I was learning, was heavier than a lie. I pretended to take the pills. The white bottle sat on the bathroom sink like a small law. Julie had arranged them into neat piles and labeled the days with tiny squares of tape. Greg said he worried about me missing doses. He sounded kind. He sounded like a man who believed what he said. But I had learned the language of lies. The cameras had shown me how hands moved when they wanted something. I had seen Greg in the night with the drawer. I had seen him practice signatures on serviettes. So the morning I pretended to take the pills I was careful. In the bathroom I faked the swallow and then tipped the pill into the sink and flushed. I watched it go out of sight and felt my heart beat steady and slow. The cameras caught more than I expected. In the living room clip I saw Julie whispering into the phone, her face soft and the speech gentle. Greg came up behind her and patted her shoulder like a proud man. It felt like a rehearsal for the courthouse. In the footage from the kitchen I listened to their words. Julie said, "Make sure he misses enough to look off, but not so much they think we did it." Greg said, "Judges want caregivers. We'll be the heroes." I saved the clip and labeled it medication talk. I burned it onto the tiny USB and put another in the safe. I started to plan how to show things to a lawyer so official that it could not be brushed off as a jealous lie. Robert Shepard's name sat on a card in my pocket like a promise. I had called him the week before, left a cautious message, and he had called back with a calm voice that made me feel like someone had put a life raft in the water. That afternoon I cooked them a meal. I did it because they expected it, because the table was mine, and because I wanted them to feel comfortable and to act natural in front of the cameras. Julie smiled quietly and said, "You are so brave, Dad." She used the talk of a good woman, but I heard the planning again. She moved a plate aside and left it half empty like a hint. After they left the table and the room quieted, I watched the playback of the night again. Greg's hand was steady when he moved the pill bottle into his pocket. Julie's lips stayed tight when the phone call ended. The footage made a map of their intent. It did not show everything. It did not have the private vows between them. But it showed a pattern. When I watched patterns long enough, they make sense. That night I put the printed frame of the clip into a file labeled medical misconduct and drove to Shepard's office. The drive was short but trembling. The small victory felt like salt, useful, sharp. When I gave the file to him, he did not flinch. "Good," he said. His voice was calm like a steady clock. "We'll use this." They began to film me like a play. Julie had a small phone propped on the counter and she moved it like a director. The clip showed me misplacing my keys while Julie narrated, "He does this all the time." The next scene she filmed indoors showed me confused for a breath and then standing as if searching. Outside, she told the neighbors, "I worry about him. He's so absent lately." Their faces were kind and guarded, like people who had practiced a memory. I watched those clips in the garage with the door half closed. The screen showed my mouth moving and the words coming out wrong. It made the skin under my eyes itch. I had never been a man who lost his way in his head. I had been a man who fixed motors and read wiring diagrams and could recall a face in a crowd. But the footage made me seem small and shaky. That was the point. I started to act like the actor they wanted. When the phone rang I mumbled the time wrong on purpose sometimes. I pretended to forget a name now and then, but I filmed everything before I did it. It was a strange war, give them the small things so they could not frame me with the big lie. I wanted to show the court the set behind the stage. One evening Julie tried to record me saying I could not remember how to pay a bill. She asked me in a sweet voice, "Dad, tell me how you pay your mortgage." I saw the phone like a trap and I answered, simple and clear, online, bank transferred every first. She looked annoyed and switched off the phone. Later, in another clip, she asked me again in a different tape and I acted like the confusion they wanted. I moved my hands and fumbled a bit and they smiled like it was working. It was a risky strategy. I kept repeating the plan with a prayer. If they used my small fumbles as larger proof, I would have to show the whole set. I fed them small crumbs to watch and kept the cameras rolling to make bread for my defense. For every staged clip they recorded, I had the camera that recorded how it was staged. I kept a journal of each staged event. Date, time, who filmed, what was said. The pages filled fast. Writing it out made each lie heavier and more visible. Each entry on the paper was a small promise I made to myself, keep going, one day show everything. The house felt like a theater where I was both an actor and the only audience who knew the truth. A man with a soft voice and no clear badge came to check on my cognition. He had a folder and a professional smile. Julie had set it up, she said, as a simple check to confirm things were okay. The man asked me odd questions in a ripe, testing way. "What day is it? Can you name 3 presidents?" He smiled when I answered. He wrote things down. I had met men like him before, health workers and social visitors who had wanted me to sign forms for my old neighbor. But this man's eyes slid just a little too fast. I watched his pen move like a small animal. He asked whether I noticed any problems remembering things. I answered honestly but carefully. Sometimes, I said, I forget a name, but not much else. He smiled and wrote it down. Later, replaying the hidden camera we had planted in the hallway, I saw Greg whisper to the men and hand him a small envelope. I rewound the tape and watched again. The men took the envelope with a small nod. The camera showed scribbles and notes, and the men writing something that did not match the neatness of Julie's script. It was the kind of proof that a judge would not like to ignore. Robert Shepard said the men might be a hired evaluator, someone who could poke holes in my case. Be careful, he advised. Make sure to ask for credentials next time. I did not want another surprise visit. I learned to stop opening the door to professional strangers without names. In the days after the man's visit, I changed routines. I started having lunch at the coffee shop more often. I made friends there and began to speak about small things that showed how steady I was. I talked about the old engine I kept in the garage and how the pistons fit. The regulars nodded and offered small praise. It mattered. The more people I could show as witnesses, the less easy it would be for them to claim I was unfit. The man's visit taught me a lesson about trust. People in suits and soft voices can be tools. I had always trusted faces with kind eyes. Now I trusted paper and camera and lawyer more. The world was a strange place where a small envelope could tilt a life. But I was learning to sway it back. The night I watched Greg coaching Julie, I felt a cold clarity settle on my shoulders. The footage showed Greg laying out a sheet of paper on the kitchen table and pointing at certain lines like an actor directing a scene. Julie listened and nodded. He said, "Act concerned, not greedy. Judges love caregivers. Use tears if you must. Keep the camera ready and be consistent." I paused the replay and held the phone in my lap. The small light of the screen painted my hands ghostly white. It was the first time I had seen their planning in so much detail. Up until then I had suspected. Now I had clear instruction. The walnuts of their intent lay bare on the table. When I drove the footage to Shepard the next morning, he studied it, face unreadable, and then he set his jaw. "This is good," he said. "This is exactly the kind of thing a court will see as deliberate. We'll file counters and show motive." I felt a small jolt of relief. It wasn't victory, but it was a notch forward. Shepard asked me to do something I had never done before, organize the evidence like a case. We made folders, labeled them with big letters: financial, medical, witnesses, video. Each clip had a sticky note. Each document had a copy. The office smelled of new paper and coffee. It felt oddly like home, a place where things were fixed and put back whole. At home I started to change the way I spoke to Julie. I kept my voice low and steady, asked simple questions, and recorded nothing. She got annoyed at first. "You are being strange," she said. But the cameras kept their quiet watch. For every move she made to make me seem lost, I had a backup move to show how she had done it. I also started to meet people who mattered, former co-workers from the plant, a neighbor who remembered my work on the community garden, a man who had served with me at the volunteer fire brigade. They agreed to watch me in my element, to talk about the small tasks I still did with clear head and steady hands. Shepard said people like that were heavy in court. Testimony from them would help carry weight no paperwork could. That week I slept less, walked more, and made sure my hands were steady when I fixed a broken lawnmower. When I worked with the tools, my arms remembered the old rhythm, and my chest felt fuller. The cameras watched the whole time, and I watched them back, like a man making sure the story would end right. The phone alert sprang up like a small fire on the screen: unauthorized transfer. My heart thudded hard and slow. I opened the banking app with trembling fingers. $14,000 had moved overnight from my account to a name I did not recognize. The destination account number ended in letters that matched Greg's initials. The bank had frozen it, pending verification, but the attempt had been made. I printed the confirmation at the library and felt the paper like a slap. The number was there in black ink, and beneath it a line that read, "Recipient, Gregory M. Harris." The world narrowed. This was not a small theft. This was a large, living thing with teeth. I called Shepard from my car. His voice came through steady and quiet. Keep all records. Do not confront them alone. We document, we call police, we press. Each word felt heavy and right. Later that day the bank manager called to confirm they had flagged the transfer and that the attempt had failed. They would open a fraud file and alert law enforcement if necessary. The bank's voice was professional and slightly surprised. It is good you called in, the manager said. Inside the house Julie smiled like a woman who already had money in her pocket. She told me not to worry and that sometimes online systems make mistakes. She hugged me and her cheek pressed my temple like a soft door shutting. I did not respond. I moved slowly that evening, collecting the printed statements and the evidence we had saved. The USB in my shoe felt warm from my movement. I also started to make copies of the checks and to download the metadata of the security camera files. Shepard taught me how to extract timestamps and to save the original footage with a checksum to prove it was not altered. I learned new words: metadata, checksum, authentication. They were heavy terms but they felt like armor. The bank called Detective Reed that afternoon after I pressed the matter. Detective Reed came to the house and took notes. He was a man of few words and lots of patient eyes. He looked at the cameras and nodded. This is a solid lead, he said. He asked for copies of anything we had. I felt hope like a small seed. That night I slept with my phone under my pillow and the printouts on the bedside table. I had not been naive about the world, but I had been surprised by the speed of their greed. Now I had the bank on my side and a detective with a serious face. The tide had turned in one small place. It was not the end, but it was the start of something that felt like justice. The house became a stage and I had to keep my lines straight. I cooked them dinner like always, set the table, and kept the silverware shining. Julie made small comments meant for others. Dad gets confused sometimes, bless him, while Greg laughed in a low way that hid teeth. The cameras recorded their lines and the quiet movements behind them. I felt the power of being calm. When they hinted, I smiled and said nothing that could be twisted. When Julie tried to coax me into saying I couldn't pay a bill, I answered plainly, I handle the mortgage online the first of each month. Her smile fell for a breath. She forced it back like a mask. A week after the transfer attempt, a paper arrived. A petition for guardianship, stamped with the county seal. The words on the page seemed small and distant, but the meaning was enormous. They had filed. They wrote that I suffered from memory loss and was a risk to myself. They said I needed someone to make decisions about my health and property. On the bottom they signed the names that had once been my family. I felt my mouth go dry. It was as if somebody had moved a piece on a board in a game I did not know I was playing. My hands opened and closed. The house was suddenly too small. Shepard told me to breathe and not to react in public. Let them speak first, he said. We will gather evidence and counter. They will have to prove it. His confidence steadied me like a hand on the back. The lawyer filed our response and asked the court to delay any action until hearings could be held to look at the full evidence. But the neighbors had already been told a story. Julie had posted a careful note on the neighborhood forum about Dad's safety concerns, and people had commented with small sympathy emojis. I felt seen and not seen at once. Sympathy without truth feels like a thin coat on a winter night. I started to prepare for the hearing in a new way. Each night I printed a copy of the relevant footage, bank statements, and notes. I arranged them in neat folders on the dining room table like a soldier preparing gear. The house hummed around me while I worked. The small red light on the living room camera blinked like a tiny heartbeat. I felt less alone. Embarrassment came like a cold blade when Julie told the neighbors a story about the stove. She said I left it on and that I often forgot the kettle. People who had once waved at me now lowered their eyes and nodded. Mrs. Patterson stopped bringing over the evening muffins. I had no idea, she said when I saw her at the mailbox, and her gaze slid away like someone ashamed of a truth they had swallowed. I invited a few old friends over. I wanted witnesses who could say what they knew. Frank, my old shift captain from the volunteer crew, came first. He sat in my living room like he was taking the chair and smiling at old times. He talked to me about old runs and asked detailed questions about engines and protocols. I answered each one clearly and called up old memories like tools on a shelf. Frank listened and nodded, His presence was an anchor. The day before the first hearing I found a note slipped under my door. It read, "We are helping you, Dad." In Julie's handwriting. I folded the paper and put it in my notebook. I also added a copy of the bank's fraud report and the printed screen of the failed transfer. Shepard emailed a list of witnesses he wanted to subpoena. Frank was on it. So was Tom from the plant and Mrs. Helen from down the street. I practiced speaking in short, clear sentences to prepare for the courtroom. It felt odd to rehearse one's life as if reciting a script, but the judge would need facts, not pleas. I wrote out simple sentences. I pay my own bills, I do my bookkeeping, I can manage my finances. I said them aloud to the walls and to the camera, and each time my voice grew a touch firmer. At night I checked the footage again and found another small thing. Julie had recorded me asking for help and then edited the clip to make it seem longer than it was. I printed the full unedited footage as proof. Each piece I gathered felt like a brick for a wall I was building around my life. I slept less and planned more. The hearing would come on Tuesday, and with it the chance to show what was true. The courthouse smelled like old wood and paper and quiet purpose. I sat with Shepard in the small waiting room and felt my palms sweat just a little. People kept moving past, with faces set like they were on a march. Julie and Greg arrived together, hands folded and eyes bright with practiced concern. Their lawyer carried a folder like an umbrella. They all looked ready for a scene. When the judge called the case, I stood and walked to the stand with my shoulders straight. The courtroom was a square of still life. The judge's bench was high and elegant. The gallery held a few neighbors who had come to watch. I saw Mrs. Patterson among them, eyes downcast. Frank and Tom were in the front row looking steady as a coastline in a storm. Their lawyer painted a picture of worry. "Your Honor," he said with slow cadence, "my clients only wish to protect Mr. Gray. They are concerned for his safety. He has shown confusion and could be at risk." He had photographs of the staged kitchen and the short clips Julie had made that made me look small and breathless. Shepard waited. His face was calm. When my turn came he said, "Your Honor, we have evidence these scenes were manufactured. We have video of my client's home life and of discussions about staging evidence." He slid folders across the table with a quiet hand. The court monitor clicked on and the first clip played. My stomach clenched. On the screen Julie's voice whispered about making the kitchen messy and Greg's hand pointed at certain points on the floor. The room made a low sound. Faces turned. I felt strange watching myself from the outside, but the footage was honest and raw. Then Shepard played another clip, Greg rifling in my drawer late at night. The bank papers we had printed were shown as well. The judge's face read like a slow-moving tide. He asked questions, listened, and then asked for more time to review the materials. The day stretched long and heavy. But when we left the courtroom I felt a small relief. We had shown something that could not be erased by a smile. Justice moves slow, but even a slow thing can arrive. The hearing adjourned that day, but word spread faster than paper. By the next morning, neighbors knew half-truths shaped like daggers. Julie had told them the judge was concerned for my health and had ordered supervision. Neither was true. Still, Mrs. Patterson waved from across the street with the look people save for fragile things. The pity was almost worse than the lie. Inside, the house felt too quiet. Greg and Julie moved like they'd won. They whispered in corners, voices just low enough to blur. Once, I caught Greg saying, "Another few weeks, and the court will side with us." His confidence scared me more than his threats. He believed in his own fiction. That evening, they threw out the leftovers from dinner before I could wrap them. "Don't worry about this stuff," Julie said sweetly. "It's not safe for you to reheat food." My jaw tightened. I said nothing. Silence had become my sharpest weapon. I went to the garage that night and backed up every file twice, one on a USB, one on an external drive. I hid them in 2 separate toolboxes. The act made me breathe easier. If they destroyed one, the other would live. Shepard called later, calm as always. "They'll keep playing for sympathy," he said. "Don't rise to it. Facts will win." Days crawled. Then one afternoon, Helen from 2 houses down slipped through my side gate holding a small envelope. Her eyes darted around. They filmed you last week, she whispered. Said it was to show how you forget things. But I saw Greg move your tools first. I opened the envelope. Inside were printed stills, me in the yard looking for my wrench, Greg smirking behind me. Would you testify if needed? I asked. Her nod was steady. Of course. You helped my husband when he fell last winter. I remember who you are, Will. When she left, the air felt clearer. For the first time, a neighbor had looked me in the eye without pity. Someone saw the truth forming. I sat at the kitchen table and marked her name in my journal under Allies. It looked lonely on the page, but it was a start. Outside, I saw Julie watching through the curtain. Her face was pale, her smile brittle. She didn't know the envelope's contents, but she sensed a shift. So did I. The story they were building had sprung a leak, and truth, slow, steady, unstoppable, had begun to pour through. The court date landed on a gray Tuesday. I dressed the way I always had when life demanded seriousness, pressed shirt, old wristwatch, steady hands. Shepard met me on the courthouse steps, a small smile tucked beneath his calm eyes. Let them talk first, he said. We'll burn them with facts later. Inside, the benches filled with quiet bodies, neighbors, 2 reporters, even Helen clutching her purse like a shield. Julie and Greg arrived together, matching suits, faces rehearsed into pity. Their lawyer looked smug, the kind of men who believe sympathy can drown evidence. When the judge entered, we stood. Julie took the stand first. Her voice trembled just enough to sound sincere. Dad's been different, she said softly. He forgets names, leaves things on. We just want him safe. Greg added his part with smooth precision. We've caught him wandering at night. He's not the man he used to be. Shepard's pen moved across his yellow pad, calm strokes. When my turn came, he stood and said, Your Honor, we request permission to present video evidence. The judge nodded. The lights dimmed slightly, and the first clip filled the monitor. Julie's voice echoed through the courtroom, make it messier before you take the photo. Gasps whispered through the benches. The next clip played, Greg coaching her on acting sad. The room grew still except for the hum of the air conditioner. Do you deny this is you? Shepard asked. Julie's lips parted, but no sound came. Greg blurted, You had no right to record us. Shepard's tone stayed even. He had every right. It's his home. The judge leaned forward. Continue, Mr. Shepard. We showed the late-night footage of Greg rifling my drawer, the bank's record of his failed transfer attempt, and the statement from Detective Reed confirming fraud under investigation. Helen's still photos appeared next, proof of the stage tool scene. Each image landed like a hammer. When Shepard finished, silence swallowed the room. Even their lawyer shifted, face losing color. The judge cleared her throat. I've seen enough for now. Recess until tomorrow for review. Outside, sunlight hit hard. Shepard clasped my shoulder. You stayed calm. That matters. I nodded, watching Julie and Greg hurry to their car without looking back. For the first time in months, their steps didn't sound confident, they sounded scared. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen counter with tea and the hum of the refrigerator for company. The house felt both heavy and light, like a battlefield after smoke clears but before you count the fallen. Julie's words replayed in my head, he's not the man he used to be. She was right in one way. The men she'd known would have folded under guilt. The men sitting there now had learned how to fight quietly. At dawn, I went through every file again, labeling exhibits neatly. Shepard had said judges respect order as much as evidence. I organized everything in sequence, the whispers, the forged transfer, the false doctor, the coaching clip. Watching the pattern bloom across pages made me realize how long the betrayal had been building. It wasn't sudden. It was patient. Around noon, Shepard called. Tomorrow's closing arguments. They'll try to paint you cruel for recording family. You need to stay composed. I promised I would. Good, he said. Because you've already won in their eyes. They know it. I hung up and walked outside. Mrs. Patterson was tending her roses again. She looked up and smiled hesitantly. Heard what happened in court. Maybe we were wrong to listen. I smiled back. We all want to believe kindness first. Nothing wrong with that. Her eyes softened. Good luck tomorrow, Will. Back inside, I sat at the same table where they'd once planned to take everything. The afternoon light streamed through the blinds in golden lines, touching the papers neatly stacked before me. They looked like a fortress made of truth. When the phone buzzed with a message from Julie, "Please stop this. You're ruining us." I stared at it for a long time. Then I typed 2 words, "You did." I turned off the phone, locked the evidence in my bag, and whispered to the empty room, "Tomorrow ends this." My voice didn't tremble. It sounded like someone who'd finally remembered who he was. Court resumed under the same dim light and quiet buzz. I took the stand for the final time. Shepard's questions came steady and clear. "Mr. Gray, do you manage your own bills?" "Yes." I listed dates, payments, even the exact balance in my account that morning. The judge nodded slightly. "Do you cook your own meals?" "I do. And I turn off the stove every time." A soft chuckle rippled through the gallery. Then came their lawyer's turn. "Mr. Gray," he said smoothly, "isn't it true you've become paranoid? Installing cameras in your home, against your daughter?" I looked him in the eye. Paranoia is what people call awareness when it makes them uncomfortable. A murmur spread through the benches. Even the judge's lips twitched. The lawyer's color rose. "So you admit to spying?" "I admit to surviving." Shepard stepped in. "Your Honor, these recordings exposed fraud, theft, and deceit. Without them, my client would have lost his home and freedom." The judge raised her hand. "Enough. I've seen more integrity from Mr. Gray than from either petitioner. Proceed to verdict." Her voice filled the room like a gavel before the sound. Petition for guardianship denied. The court finds no evidence of incapacity. Further, evidence suggests deliberate financial exploitation by the petitioners. This matter is referred to law enforcement. Gasps. Movement. Greg's chair scraped the floor. Julie covered her face. The judge continued, firm and unshakable, "Mr. Gray retains full rights." Court adjourned. The gavel fell. The sound was thunder. I stood slowly, every bone in my body alive again. Shepard smiled, the calm cracking into pride. "You did it," he whispered. Outside, the reporters gathered near the steps, microphones like flowers reaching for sun. One asked, "You had proof the whole time?" I smiled faintly. I had truth. Truth just needed a stage. The cameras flashed. The courthouse doors closed behind us, but for me, the story had only just begun. Outside the courthouse, sunlight hit my face like freedom. Reporters crowded close, their microphones' tiny mouths hungry for words. One asked, "Mr. Gray, what will you do now that you've won?" I thought for a second. "Go home," I said. "It's still mine." They laughed softly, the way people do when they don't know whether to cheer or cry. Shepard walked beside me to the parking lot. "Expect fallout," he warned. "Greg and Julie may not accept defeat quietly." I nodded. "They've already shown who they are." He handed me a folder, official copies of the judgment, police referral, and restraining order. The weight of it steadied me. Paper had saved me where love once lived. When I reached my truck, Helen and Mrs. Patterson stood waiting. Helen hugged me first. "You showed them, Will." Patterson's smile was shy. "We were fooled." "I'm sorry." I told her, apology accepted. Truth has long legs, it always catches up. Back home, the air smelled clean, untouched. The living room still carried their echo, but it was fading. I opened every window, letting the late summer wind sweep through like a baptism. Then I brewed coffee, the first cup I'd made in peace for months. I sat by the window, the sunlight glinting off the silver pot, and realized how silence could sound like safety. That night, the phone rang once. I let it go to voicemail. Greg's voice, low and bitter, "You'll regret this, old man." I deleted it. Another call, Julie's. "Dad, please." I never meant for it to go this far. Her tone cracked like a tired hinge. I stared at the phone until the screen dimmed. I didn't answer. Before bed, I placed the court folder in my safe, next to the camera footage. Those papers weren't trophies, they were armor. I checked each lock, each window latch. Then I stood in the center of my quiet home and whispered, "This is mine." Sleep came easily for the first time in a year. In dreams, I saw my wife's face, calm and proud. She didn't speak, but her eyes said everything. "You came back." Morning light spread across the kitchen like forgiveness. I made oatmeal, fed the sparrows by the porch, and read the newspaper headline that made me pause: "Local father wins against fraudulent guardianship." My story was out. Neighbors who'd once looked away now knocked on my door with cautious smiles. Mrs. Patterson brought lemon bars. "You must feel vindicated," she said. "Not really," I replied. "You don't win when it's your child you lose." She nodded, eyes wet. "Still, you stood up." By noon, a detective arrived, read again, crisp uniform, quiet tone. "Mr. Gray," he said, "the DA's office is pursuing charges against Greg Harris for attempted fraud and coercion. We'll need certified copies of your recordings." I opened the safe and handed him the drive. He treated it like evidence, not gossip, and that felt right. "We'll be in touch," he said. After he left, I sat at the table staring at Julie's old handwriting still taped to the fridge. "We're helping you, Dad." I thought about tearing it down but didn't. Some reminders deserve to stay, not as wounds but as warnings. Later, Helen dropped by again with coffee and news. "The neighborhood's talking," she said, half amused. "Someone posted your story online. They called him crazy. He caught them on camera." I chuckled softly. "Guess I'm famous for being sane." That evening, I took a slow walk around the block. Kids played in yards, sprinklers hissed, and for once, people waved. The air didn't feel thick with judgment anymore. Each nod felt like a quiet apology. I accepted them all with a lift of my hand. When I returned home, I stood in the doorway and looked around. No hidden phones. No staged mess. Just my chair, my tools, my peace. I brewed another cup of coffee, the same dark roast Greg once spilled on my laptop. The smell rose warm and strong. I smiled. The phone buzzed, a message from Shepard. "Press wants a quote for tomorrow's follow-up. You up for it?" I typed back, "Tell them this, truth doesn't need to shout, it just waits for lies to burn themselves out." Weeks passed, and peace began to feel ordinary again. But quiet never lasts forever. Late one afternoon, my doorbell rang. Julie stood there alone, hair messy, eyes red. She looked smaller than I remembered. "Dad," she said, voice breaking. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. She entered slowly, gaze moving around the living room like she was seeing a ghost. "It's clean," she whispered. "It always was," I replied. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table where the war had started. She twisted her hands. "Greg's been arrested. They found his gambling accounts. I didn't know it was this bad. I thought we were fixing things." Her words tripped over themselves. "You let him hit me, Julie," I said softly. "You told people I was losing my mind." She covered her face. "I was scared. He said we'd lose everything. I didn't know how to stop it. I wanted to believe her. The girl I'd raised loved music and painted her shoes in high school. That girl wasn't cruel. But the woman before me had watched me bleed and said nothing. Forgiveness didn't come easy. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'll say it 1,000 times if I have to." "I don't need 1,000, I said. "I just need truth." Her eyes met mine, full of tears that looked real this time. "Will you ever talk to me again?" "Maybe," I said. "Someday. But not today." She nodded, stood, and walked toward the door. Halfway out, she turned. "You were always the strongest man I knew." Then she was gone. I sat alone for a long while, her words echoing. I didn't feel strong. Just tired, and oddly lighter. Sometimes justice isn't about victory. It's about breathing clean air again after someone tried to choke it out of you. The seasons shifted without fanfare. Autumn painted the trees gold. I repaired my fence, oiled the hinges, and started volunteering at the firehouse again, light duties, mostly teaching drills. The younger recruits listened close when I spoke about observation, patience, and evidence. See everything, I told them. Even smoke tells you the truth if you know how to read it. The county invited me to speak at a seminar on elder rights. Standing behind the podium, I told the story simply, no bitterness, no drama. They said I was losing it, I told the audience. They were right, in a way. I lost my fear. The crowd went quiet, then clapped softly, like they understood. After the talk, people lined up to shake my hand. Some had tears, others questions. I gave them Shepherd's card and told them to keep good records. When it was over, I stepped outside into the crisp November air. The courthouse across the street glowed orange in the sunset. The windows reflected the light like fire. That reflection looked like everything I'd endured, bright, consuming, and finally cleansing. The lies had burned away. What remained was simple, truth, freedom, and the will to protect both. That night, back home, I made tea instead of coffee and watched the sky fade to dark. My cameras still hung in their places, not for defense now but for comfort. They had been witnesses when people failed to be. I took my notebook from the drawer and wrote one final entry, case closed. Lesson learned. Never hand your story to anyone who wants to rewrite it. The pen hovered, then added, justice isn't revenge, it's clarity. Outside, the wind carried the faint scent of smoke from a neighbor's chimney. I smiled, not at the fire's heat, but at its honesty. Fire doesn't lie, it only shows what's left when everything false is gone. Winter came early that year, sharp and white. I woke each morning to frost on the windows and quiet on the street. The house held its breath in the cold, creaking softly as the sun rose. Life had settled into a rhythm, coffee, newspaper, workbench. I still checked the locks, not out of fear anymore, but habit. The sheriff's office called one morning to tell me Greg had taken a plea deal. 3 years, maybe less with good behavior, the deputy said. He confessed to attempted fraud and falsifying documents. I thanked him and hung up. No joy, no anger, just a sense of completion, like closing a heavy book. Later, I drove out past the edge of town where the desert met the hills. The horizon looked endless, a clean slate of gold and gray. I parked by an old windmill and sat on the hood of my truck. The air smelled of sage and dry iron. For months, I'd lived reacting to every shadow. Now there were none. A truck slowed on the road below. The driver waved, it was Frank from the firehouse. He stopped beside me. Heard the news, he said. You must feel lighter. I shrugged. Lighter, sure. Not freer. Freedom comes when you stop checking your back every 5 minutes. He nodded. You ever think about moving? Fresh start. I looked at the hills. This is my fresh start, I said. I'm not running from my own house. We stood there a while in the cold, 2 men with quiet understandings. Before he drove off, he said, you taught everyone something, Will. Not just about the law, about backbone. Back home, I took down the last camera. The screw squeaked, then came free. I wrapped the camera in cloth and set it in the drawer beside my notebook. Not destroyed, just resting. Some tools you keep, even when the job is done. That night I lit a single candle on the table and watched the flame steady itself. No lies, no noise, no fear, just a clean, upright light. Spring thawed the last of the frost and brought new noise to the block, kids on bikes, barking dogs, the rattle of sprinklers. I began fixing neighbors' lawnmowers again, small jobs that kept my hands busy and my mind calm. Word spread that I was the man who caught the con. People asked for advice about wills, accounts, and passwords. I showed them how to keep things locked, documented, safe. Helen said one afternoon, you've become a sort of local legend. I laughed. Legends are taller stories. I'm just stubborn. Letters started arriving, some from strangers across the state. One wrote, you gave me courage to check my finances. My son had been stealing. Another, thank you for showing it's never too late to fight back. I kept the letters in a shoebox under my bed. Reading them didn't make me proud, it made me grounded. Every story was another version of mine, just with different faces. One day, Shepard called. "How's retirement treating you?" he asked. I smiled. "Feels strange to live without court dates." He chuckled. "You know, there's a support network forming for cases like yours. They want you to speak again." I thought for a moment. Maybe. But I'd rather build something than talk about it. So I did. I started a small workshop in my garage, wood, metal, and lessons on vigilance. I called it the Proof Room. Every Saturday, folks came by. I taught them how to make safes, label folders, and document things clearly. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about prevention. One Saturday evening, as the last student left, Helen stopped by with 2 cups of lemonade. "You ever get lonely?" she asked. "Sometimes," I admitted. "But it's a quiet kind, not the dangerous kind." She smiled. "That's the best kind." We sat on the porch watching dusk settle, 2 survivors of different wars, breathing the same gentle air. Summer brought a heat that shimmered on the pavement. Life in the neighborhood had returned to ordinary. Kids ran through sprinklers, and the world pretended nothing strange had ever happened here. But sometimes, ordinary is the best disguise for healing. I spent the mornings tending the garden, roses, just like Mrs. Patterson's. She still waved from her fence, now without guilt in her eyes. Once she said, "You know, your daughter visits the library every week. I think she's trying to get better." The words sat in my chest for days. I didn't answer her then. I wasn't ready. Forgiveness is a road without maps, you walk it when your feet decide to move. One afternoon, a letter came in Julie's handwriting. No return address. Inside, "Dad, I'm in therapy. I'm sorry again. I hope you're well. I miss you." Short, trembling lines. I read it twice, then set it beside my notebook. I didn't respond, but I didn't throw it away either. At the workshop, a retired teacher asked me, "Do you ever wish it hadn't happened?" I thought hard before answering. Of course. But then I wouldn't know who I really am. Sometimes pain is just the world's way of reintroducing you to yourself. That night, thunder rolled far off across the valley. Rain came gentle at first, then hard. I stood on the porch, the smell of wet earth thick and clean. Each drop felt like punctuation at the end of a long story. When the storm eased, I looked up at the clear patch of sky and whispered, "I forgive you, Julie." The words weren't for her, they were for me. Inside, I tore the old note from the fridge. The tape left a clean rectangle on the door. For the first time, the space felt right. By autumn again, the house no longer felt haunted. It felt lived in, tools neatly lined up, books stacked on the shelf, a kettle that never burned dry. The air was calm, like a song with no words but a good tune. One Sunday, Helen brought over a pie and stayed for dinner. We talked about small things, gardens, weather, the way time softens sharp edges. When she left, she touched my arm lightly and said, "You've earned your peace." I watched her go, realizing peace isn't something you win, it's something you keep alive. Later that week, a thick envelope arrived from the DA's office. Inside was the final closure notice, State versus Harris, case resolved. No appeals. No loose ends. The past had officially ended. I sat at the table with the letter open and felt the quiet pride of someone who had survived the storm and stayed standing. I took out my notebook for the last time and wrote, "Truth needs patience, but patience rewards truth." Then I closed it and slid it into the drawer with the cameras. Outside, the first leaves began to fall. The world was still imperfect, still human, still loud beyond my fence, but my corner of it was honest. That was enough. Before bed, I stood by the window and whispered the same sentence that had carried me through every fight, "This is mine." The house didn't answer, it didn't need to. Its silence was agreement. When I turned off the light, the dark felt gentle, not threatening. I knew morning would come, and with it, another quiet, honest day. The year's end came quietly. December mornings carried a thin chill that crept under the door. I didn't mind. Cold reminded me I was still alive. The newspapers had stopped calling, the story had faded from headlines, but the echoes lingered. Sometimes at the grocery store, strangers would whisper, "That's him, the men who caught them." They didn't say my name, but they didn't say crazy either. That was enough. One afternoon, as I left the store, I saw Julie standing by the parking lot entrance. She looked unsure, holding a paper bag of groceries like a shield. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she walked toward me. "Dad," she said softly. "I wanted to see you." We stood there under the winter sun, two people stitched together by blood and broken trust. "How are you?" I asked. "Sober," she said. "Working at the shelter. Greg can't contact me anymore." I think I'm getting better." I studied her face, older now, lines that hadn't been there before. Regret leaves its own scars. "That's good," I said. She nodded, eyes glossy. "Can I hug you?" I hesitated, then opened my arms. The hug was brief, awkward, real. She smelled like soap and new beginnings. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said, pulling back. "But I wanted you to know I'm trying." I smiled faintly. "That's all that matters, Julie. Keep trying." When she left, I sat in my truck a long time, hands on the steering wheel, heart full of something too mixed to name. Pain and relief can share a body if you let them. I drove home slowly, the world blurred by sunset. That night, I set another log in the fireplace and watched the flames twist and settle. Fire, honest, unstoppable, cleansing. The same light that once symbolized destruction now felt like balance. Julie had stepped out of her darkness. I'd stepped out of mine. The new year arrived with quiet rain and the smell of damp earth. I spent the morning clearing the gutters and fixing a loose shingle. When I came down the ladder, Helen was waiting on the porch with 2 mugs of coffee. "You work too hard," she said, handing me one. "Idle hands invite ghosts," I replied, and she laughed. We sat on the porch swing, rain pattering on the roof. "I read your quote in the newspaper again," she said. "About truth waiting for lies to burn out." I smiled. Still true. Later that week, the county invited me to record a video for their elder safety campaign. They wanted a simple message, something honest, something that could help others spot warning signs before it was too late. I agreed. Standing under the studio lights, I felt oddly calm. The producer asked, "What's the one thing you'd tell people who feel trapped?" I looked into the camera and said, "They told my neighbors I was losing it. What I lost was silence." Speak up. Record everything. Trust your gut, not their guilt. When the video aired online, messages flooded in again. Survivors. Children who'd turned around. A woman wrote, "My father's story saved my mother's life." I realized the story no longer belonged only to me. It had become a spark lighting dark rooms I'd never see. That evening, Helen came by with dinner. "They're calling you a hero now," she said. "Heroes are just tired people who didn't quit," I answered. After she left, I turned off the lights and watched the rain through the window. The reflection of the courthouse across the street shimmered in puddles, orange and alive, like fire that refused to die. Spring again. 1 full year since the first whisper that started it all. Mrs. Patterson organized a neighborhood barbecue to celebrate new beginnings. I went, carrying a plate of ribs and a piece I hadn't known before. People greeted me warmly, genuine this time. Kids ran circles around the tables, and music floated through the warm air. Helen sat beside me, laughter soft and easy. "You realize you're the reason half these people locked their bank accounts," she teased. "Glad to be useful," I said. As the evening deepened, someone raised a toast. To Will Gray, the men who reminded us that truth always finds a way. The crowd cheered lightly, glasses clinking. My face flushed, not with pride, but with gratitude. I lifted my own glass. "To neighbors who learn to see before they judge," I said. Later, I slipped away from the noise, walking down the block under the streetlights. The houses glowed warm behind their curtains. My house waited at the end, lights low, steady. Inside, I noticed a letter on the mat, no return name, just my address. I opened it. "Dad, I found your old firefighter photo album in storage. I thought you'd want it back. Love, Julie." I smiled, fingers tracing the edges of the paper. The past had sent me something small, simple, and kind. I placed the letter beside my framed photo of the fire crew. The men in the picture grinned at me like they'd known all along I'd make it through. That night, I slept without checking the locks. Some victories whisper instead of roar. By late summer, peace had grown roots. The days filled with routine, coffee with Helen, evening walks, calls from old station friends. Life had rebuilt itself quietly, brick by honest brick. One afternoon, Shepard stopped by unexpectedly. "Just checking on my favorite client," he said, smiling. "How's the world treating you?" "Fairly," I said. "That's all I ask for." He handed me a document, final property verification. "Your estate's secure. No pending claims, no legal shadows." I looked it over and nodded. "Guess it's really over, then." As he left, he said, "Not everyone gets to see justice this clean, Will. You earned it." That evening, I poured tea and sat on the porch as the sky went gold. The courthouse windows across the street caught the last sunlight, glowing like a line of steady embers. I thought of that first day, Mrs. Patterson's whisper, the humiliation, the fear, and how it all led here. I wasn't the same man. The fire that nearly destroyed me had burned away something smaller, doubt. What remained was tempered steel. Before going inside, I looked at the sky and said aloud, "They told the neighbors I was losing it." They were right, I lost my fear. The wind carried the words down the street, light and final. Inside, I closed the door gently, not as defense but as punctuation. The story was finished. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was peace earned one truth at a time. The morning after that final thought, I woke before dawn. Sunlight hadn't yet climbed over the hills, and the house was wrapped in soft blue quiet. I brewed coffee and stepped onto the porch. The air smelled like dust and new beginnings. A year ago, I would have expected tension hiding behind every shadow. Now there was only calm. A knock came around 9. It was Julie again, tentative smile, eyes clearer than before. "Morning, Dad," she said. I didn't want to intrude. She held out a brown envelope. "For you." Inside were photos, old ones. Me in uniform, her as a child on my shoulders at the 4th of July parade, her mother smiling beside us. I felt my throat tighten. "Where'd you find these?" "In Mom's old albums," she said softly. I thought maybe they belonged here. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. Finally, I said, "They always did." She nodded, tears shining but not falling. "I'm moving," she said. "Starting over in Phoenix." I wanted to say goodbye properly. I looked at her, this grown woman who'd once been my bright little girl. "Take care of yourself," I said. "You too." When she left, I hung the photo of us by the fireplace. Not as forgiveness yet, but as memory reclaimed. Sometimes love doesn't disappear. It just waits for truth to catch up. That evening, Helen came by with soup. She noticed the photo and smiled. She came by. She did. "That's good," she said gently. "Some doors need to stay cracked open, just in case." We ate quietly, both knowing she was right. The world was still flawed, but tonight it felt kind again. Weeks later, a letter arrived from the local university. They wanted to interview me for a short documentary on community trust and justice. I hesitated, then agreed. Maybe telling it again would help others spot the warning signs before it was too late. On filming day, the crew set up in my living room. Bright lights, soft hums, a microphone clipped to my collar. The interviewer, a young woman with serious eyes, asked, "If you could change one thing about what happened, what would it be?" I thought for a moment. "I wish I'd believed myself sooner," I said. "People will tell you you're crazy when your truth scares them. Believe yourself anyway." After the shoot, she thanked me. "Your calm is powerful," she said. "Most people would have wanted revenge." I smiled faintly. Justice isn't revenge. It's balance restored. When the film aired online, messages poured in again. People shared their own battles, sons, nieces, friends. Each story ended with a thank you. It humbled me. What had begun as survival had turned into something larger, Proof that one quiet man could change how others listened. Helen watched the documentary with me at the cafe. When it ended, she said softly, "You gave them a roadmap." "Maybe," I said. "But it only works if they drive it." We sat watching customers come and go, the hum of espresso machines blending with soft chatter. For the first time in years, I felt I truly belonged somewhere again. Summer's return brought small joys. I repaired the old mailbox, painted the shutters, and planted sunflowers along the fence. Every morning they faced the same direction, toward the light. I envied their certainty. Helen and I had grown closer, comfortably so. She started staying for breakfast, laughing at my stubborn toast that always burned one side. "You fight battles even with bread," she teased. One afternoon, she brought a newspaper clipping. County honors local resident for community impact. My photo sat above a caption, "Will Gray turn betrayal into advocacy, inspiring statewide reform for elder protection?" I laughed quietly. Didn't think I'd end up in print again. "You earned it," she said. "Most people break when life turns cruel. You rebuilt." That night, as crickets sang outside, I sat with that clipping under my reading lamp. My reflection in the glass looked older, yes, but not defeated. Scars can't be erased, but they can be repurposed into stories worth telling. Before bed, I opened my old notebook. The final line stared back, "Justice is clarity." I added one more, "And clarity is peace." Then I closed it for the last time. Autumn again. The air turned crisp, the light soft. I hosted a small gathering, neighbors, Shepherd, Helen, even a few firefighters from the old days. We grilled in the yard, laughter easy now. At sunset, someone handed me a microphone. "Say a few words, Will," Shepherd urged. I looked at the crowd, the same faces that had once pitted me. "A year ago," I began, "I thought I'd lost everything, my home, my name, even my sanity. But sometimes you have to lose what's false before you find what's real." The yard fell quiet. They said I was losing it, I continued. They were right. I lost fear, silence, and the need to be liked. What I found instead was truth. And truth, once found, doesn't burn, it shines. Applause rippled softly through the evening air. Helen slipped her hand into mine. "You're glowing," she whispered. "Maybe it's just peace," I said. As darkness settled, fireflies blinked among the sunflowers. Their tiny lights mirrored the stars above, honest, flickering proof that even in quiet lives, brilliance can survive the dark. I leaned back in my chair, the laughter fading into night, and thought, some fires destroy, others reveal. This one, finally, had shown me who I'd always been. Winter rolled in soft this time, no harsh winds, no heavy storms, just cool mornings and quiet evenings. Life had become something simple and beautiful. I woke early, walked to the cafe with Helen, read the paper, and watched the sun rise over the courthouse that once held my fear. Now, it looked small, harmless even. The city invited me to speak at a community event for senior safety. When I stood on that stage, faces of all ages watched, waiting for advice. "Protecting yourself doesn't mean closing your heart," I said. "It means opening your eyes." The audience nodded. A few smiled like they understood more than the words. After the talk, a young man approached me. "My mom's going through what you did," he said. "Your story gave us a way out." I gripped his hand. "Then keep telling it. Truth is contagious if you let it spread." Back home, I cooked stew while Helen set the table. She'd become part of every room, every corner of my day. When we sat down to eat, she said, "You realize people quote you now?" I laughed. Poor people, they need better material. Later that night, we sat by the window as the streetlights hummed. "You ever think about moving?" she asked. "Maybe," I said. "But every brick here knows my story. I think I'll stay. Feels like the house finally forgave me." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "Then it's home." Outside, snow began to fall in slow, drifting flakes. I thought about everything that had burned, broken, and somehow built me back. For the first time, I didn't feel like a survivor. I felt like someone living again. By spring, reporters stopped calling. The story had become history. But one headline lingered online. They called him crazy, he caught them on camera. I printed it and framed it in the hallway. Not as pride, just proof. Proof that truth, when tended, could outlive lies. Visitors saw it and smiled, some asked questions. I told them, every camera, every note, every breath I used to fight wasn't for revenge. It was for peace. Helen started volunteering at the same elder shelter Julie worked in. One evening she came home smiling. "She's doing well," she said. "Quiet, steady. You'd be proud." "I already am," I said. Later, I visited the shelter myself. Julie met me outside, eyes unsure but hopeful. "Dad," she said, "I didn't expect you." "I didn't either," I answered. "But I thought it was time." We sat on a bench under the flowering trees. She talked about helping others rebuild, about therapy, about learning patience. When she finished, she said, "You gave me a second chance." "No," I said softly. "You gave yourself one. I just stopped standing in your way." We parted with a small hug, gentle and real. No promises, no pretending, just peace. That evening, I told Helen, "I think the last fire's gone out." She smiled. "No, Will. You just learned how to live beside the flame." Summer glowed golden. The neighborhood held its annual fair again. This time, instead of whispers, I heard laughter, mine among them. I manned a small booth for the proof room, showing people how to store important documents safely. A banner read, "Truth, once written, never dies." Mrs. Patterson stopped by with lemonade. "You've turned this whole block around," she said. "People check on each other now." "That's how it should have always been," I said. Near the end of the day, Helen joined me, her hand slipping easily into mine. "You realize this is the first time I've seen you smile all day," she teased. "Guess I forgot how good it feels," I said, laughing. When the fair ended, I walked home carrying leftover flyers and the warm ache of a day well lived. At home, I brewed tea and looked out the window. Across the street, the courthouse windows caught the setting sun, glowing orange like they had that first day after trial. Only this time, it didn't look like fire, it looked like light. I whispered to myself, "The story's done." But the house seemed to hum back, "No, it's just living now." Autumn came once more, quiet and golden. On the anniversary of the trial, I sat on the porch with Helen, coffee steaming between us. "1 year," she said. "Feels like a lifetime." "It was," I said. "A life lost and another found." She reached for my hand. "If you could say one thing to the people watching your story now, what would it be?" I looked at the horizon, the courthouse glowing in the distance. "They told the neighbors I was losing it," I said. "They were right, I lost my fear. And when fear burns away, truth shines through the smoke." We sat in silence, watching the sky fade to pink. Somewhere down the street, laughter floated from the backyard. Life went on, loud and ordinary and perfect. Helen leaned close. "Think you'll ever write this down?" I smiled. "No need. The world already did." A breeze stirred the leaves. The house creaked softly, like an old friend stretching after a long rest. I closed my eyes and breathed deep. No bitterness. No anger. Just warmth. The story that began with lies ended with light. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just the men who fought back. I was the men who'd finally come home. Please subscribe to this channel for more. Don't forget to share your time zone and thoughts in the comments section.